Hello, BookTube. Today I am finally going to make my long-awaited review of Invasion by Eric L. Harry. As you might have known from my community tab and some other videos I made in past months, I got a copy with some missing pages in it from Amazon, so I bought this from my local online seller. Anyway, this book I wanted to read for a long time because what it was about. It got my curiosity. Like Harry Turtledove's Through Darkest Europe, I'm glad I read it because I was very curious about it, but it's not worth a second read, and it's not among my favorites. Nevertheless, there were some good qualities about it, more on that in a bit. So let's just get straight to the point. What is this book about? What is this novel about? The book was published in 2000. Long story short, it is a story about a Chinese invasion of the mainland United States at an unspecified future date from the year 2000. My estimate would be in the early 2010s. So this book is what you would call invasion literature, where invasion and war literature. So it's stories depicting a country being invaded by a foreign army, or major superpowers clashing and then starting a hypothetical Third World War. You've seen examples. You can also see examples of this in video games and movies. So Red Dawn and the remake come to mind. Books by Tom Clancy also come to mind. And several video games, including Command and Conquer Red Alert, as well as the game Homefront and its remake / sequel. So, invasion literature. When I read this was like reading Command and Conquer. If you're not into RTS games, you're not gonna really understand what I'm talking about here. But I have a nostalgia and love of those old RTS, real-time strategy games, where you have a bird's eye view of the map and you build your bases and forces and your economy, and then invade the enemy base. So throughout the time I was reading this book, I was thinking all those sound effects. Unit lost, building, unable to comply, building in progress, or insufficient funds. Our base is under attack. Those sound effects, those voices that you get from those RTS games, that was the vibes I was getting. So I was thinking Command and Conquer, but in the form of a novel. But the characters in the book are not cardboard cutouts. They're just not important. So the few handful of characters that are in there are actually well-developed characters. But they're just not important as opposed to the overall map of the world building of the story, so to speak. More on that in a bit. So the earliest example of invasion literature is the Battle of Dorking by an author named Chesney. I will have the name and the title of the book in the description. Excuse me. So I wasn't, like I said, I was satisfied that I read this book, and there were some good qualities about it, but I wouldn't read it again. And I absolutely despise this author's politics. I don't know his politics, but from the writing in this book, it's not easy. It's not difficult to put two and two together and say that he is a neocon. Because the story is like this. After decades of the United States government shrinking its armed forces and decreasing its armed forces presence all over the globe and becoming more and more isolationist, suddenly out of nowhere, and without any actual explanation as to ideological or economic reasons, just because it can, China embarks on a campaign of world conquest and either expands its territory or sets up puppet states all over the world. China suddenly becomes an imperial power. And it doesn't even explain as to why. And the book doesn't mention Russia. And what about the elephant in the room? Nuclear weapons. Well, in this universe, everybody all of a sudden decides that nuclear weapons, that a conventional warfare is worth it, because the price paid by using nuclear weapons, like what happened in Japan in World War II, is just not worth it. So nobody has the stomach to launch the nuclear missiles. Not the Russians, not the Chinese. Well, the Chinese a little bit more so, and definitely not the Americans. The United States president in this book says we might as well fight the Chinese on the United States mainland, even if it means the loss of lives on our home front. Because it would be so much worse. It would be the end of the world if we were to launch nuclear weapons, which I actually agree with. But anyway, why did I mention I don't like this guy's politics? This guy, Eric L. Harry's politics, from what I read in the book, is reminiscent of George W. Bush's politics, Donald Rumsfeld's politics, Henry Kissinger's politics, Dick Cheney's politics. That is, be the world police, increase military spending as much as possible, have no limitation on spending on the military, as opposed to domestic economic issue, bread and butter stuff like fixing potholes in roads. But you have to, it's always military first, military first, military first. And if the United States is not the world policeman, then somebody else will. And that's just not true. Deeper and more integrated economic ties is what stops wars, because it would be against people's economic interests to go to war with each other. So a more globalized, I know a lot of people don't like this, but a more integrated economy between countries is a better preventative measure of engaging in wars. And like I said earlier, China is not going to embark on a campaign of world conquest. It's just not going to do that. It might have some border disputes with India and of course the Taiwan and Vietnam. It might, and the South China Sea. It might have some minor border disputes, but it will not engage in a campaign of world conquest. Now, I neglected to mention. I neglected to mention the characters, but I will get to them shortly. So yeah, is this story plausible, or like, is it theoretically possible? Yes, because the author mentions numbers and terrain and military strategies like trench warfare and tanks and so on, and aircraft. Ignore the rooster. Ignore the rooster. So the author mentions gets into the great detail of warfare. So it's theoretically possible if humanity unanimously agrees not to use nuclear weapons. That's just not going to happen. So it's theoretically possible, but it's highly, highly unlikely. This is the neocons' worst nightmare. This is the paranoid musings in their heads. So, but I appreciate Eric L. Harry for making China the main antagonist, because the game Homefront and the remake of Red Dawn had North Korea invade the United States, which is even less realistic, which is even more totally out there. So Eric L. Harry took a risk. He says, okay, I know the Chinese are never going to buy my book, so whatever. So that's another thing. Having the Chinese as the main antagonist, that's another thing I wanted to. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to pick up this book. The main reason, actually. So it is. The story itself is extremely unrealistic, but and implausible. But it's theoretically possible. But just like it's theoretically possible to colonize the moons of the gas giants in our solar system, it's theoretically possible, but it's not going to happen in a long, long, long time. So, now let's get to the characters. Because I've babbled on about what I like and didn't like about this book and about the bigger picture. Let's get down to the characters. There are some Chinese characters and there's some American characters, but there are only two characters worth mentioning. The President of the United States, who happens to be a Republican, named Bill, I don't remember his last name. See, this book is so, the characters are so insignificant I don't remember their names. And his daughter Stephanie. His daughter Stephanie is actually fighting on the front lines during the invasion of the mainland United States from the Deep South. So they invade from Alabama, Mississippi, Florida area, and they progress, and the invasion moves up from there, and there's a few incursions in California as well, and they occupy Hawaii as well. So that's the Chinese strategy. And the president's daughter, Stephanie, is a hard-ass soldier who rises through the ranks as she fights on the front lines. And this is and she technically has a privilege to, as the president's daughter, to get referrals, so she's not in direct line of danger. But she doesn't want to. But she wants to inspire her fellow Americans to fight for their country, saying, "I'm not going to take the easy way out just because of my position as the president's daughter." And the president himself reluctantly allows this, even though he loves his daughter very, very much. And it gets into their personal lives, but that's also not worth talking about. And the president himself is, throughout the invasion, as they encroach and get closer and closer to DC, the Chinese the invading armies get closer and closer to DC, and there's all this vicious fight back. He is increasingly melancholic, depressed, and so on. And I'm also appreciative of the warfare depicted in this book. Sometimes it drags on for a very long time, but it clearly illustrates to you how horrible war is. How many of Stephanie's comrades, fellow soldiers in her squad or platoon or whatever, die quickly. So there's and in conventional warfare. And so the depictions of warfare are very, very brutal. But I appreciate that. It shows what members of the armed forces have to deal with in a worst case scenario. I appreciated it and didn't appreciate it at the same time because it dragged out for too long. But then I also appreciated that that's exactly how harsh war is. There's also some other side characters that are not worth mentioning, and the characters on the Chinese side are also not worth mentioning. None of the characters are worth mentioning. The most remarkable thing about this book, like I said, is the overall picture, the war itself. And I appreciated that despite Eric L. Harry being a neocon, he doesn't depict the pious conservative badass man who is a Christian fighting for his home. And there is and the main fighting character in this book is a teenage girl. A teenage girl becomes a hard ass as she rises through the ranks quickly in the armed forces. By the end of the book, she's a captain. So the book doesn't depict social conservatism very well, which I appreciate. It's more of grounded, real people. They cuss, they fool around. There is no white knights in this story. So at least I can agree with that. And I agree with Eric L. Harry that nuclear weapons is just not worth it. Launching nuclear weapons is really not worth it, even if it means your country being invaded. You're welcome to disagree with me, of course. Anyway, is there anything else I wanted to say? Oh yeah, the end of the book. I'm going to give you a heavy spoiler because I don't recommend you this book. The story is resolved by the Americans launching a new kind of super weapon, a really giant ship which can launch thousands of missiles simultaneously. They finish construction of these super weapon ships just in time, and it takes one military victory, the battle for DC and Richmond. And this one I'm not going to get into the details of. And because of that one military victory, internal forces, internal factions within the military and the civilian leadership in China start infighting, fighting against each other. Not war, but palace intrigue. And ultimately, the faction that wants to say, stop this war, too many people are dying, wins out. So it takes one military victory, the construction of a new super weapon, and infighting on the Chinese side for this story to resolve itself. Now, I apologize if I gave you the spoiler, but I'm not recommending this book. I give this book a 6 out of 10. 6 out of 10 because I'm glad that I read it, but I wouldn't read it again. I think that's about it. Oh yeah, there was another side plot about an aborted coup against the president because he wouldn't launch the nuclear weapons. So certain elements within the United States government were about to overthrow the president in a coup. And that did not come to anything. The coup was discovered and suppressed before, and quashed. The coup plotters were stopped before they could carry through with it. Okay. Anyway, this book took over a month to read. I'm glad it's over. I'm glad I made this review. I've rambled on. Thank you for listening in. Goodbye.